Welcome to Biology Made Easy. In this lesson, we are discussing cell membrane. The cell membrane. This is the ultrastructure of cell membranes. We are looking at the adaptations or the adaptive features of membrane proteins. Please check the adaptive features of the phospholipid bilayer in a previous lesson. The cell membrane, this is the cell surface membrane. The structure of it is not too different from the membranes of the organelles like mitochondrion, vesicles, vacuoles. The major difference between the cell surface membrane and the membrane of an organelle is that the cell surface membrane has glycoproteins and glycolipids, which we discussed in our lesson on structure and function of cell membranes. Today, we are looking at the adaptations of membrane proteins, specifically. Membrane proteins, we have integral proteins. These ones are the integral proteins. The integral proteins are the proteins that spans across the membrane. It's also known as transmembrane, very long, all right? And in these integral proteins, we have channel proteins. This is a channel protein, this is a carrier protein, this is a carrier protein, this is an alpha-helix protein. These integral proteins, they can be one protein or a cluster of proteins that are put together in such a way that a hole is created. So you see this channel protein has a hole, this is a hole or a channel, this is a carrier protein. Here, carrier protein, taking substances from one end of the membrane. These are substances it's carrying or an ion is carrying, and it will change shape or conformation, flip over, and release the substances it's carrying. And that is carrier proteins. Then we have alpha proteins. They are proteins whose amino acids have been put together in such a way that they are joined as helixes, a helix. And they also have poles that transport ions or other polar substances. These channel proteins, carrier proteins, alpha helix proteins, they are long, they have poles or are able to change shape to transport substances. So because they are long, they span across the membrane, they transport substances across the membrane. That is the adaptation. Long protein with hole to transport substances across the membrane in or out. Then these three proteins, they are fibrous, they are insoluble, and they are permanently embedded in the membrane. So they are associated to conduct specific ions and substances. They are fibrous. They will not be dissolved by water or ions or changes in pH. They are permanently associated to conduct specific ions or substances. They will not be dissolved. Then another adaptation of these transmembrane proteins is that the channel through which substances pass are hydrophilic. So if this is a protein, the channel here where substances pass is hydrophilic, water-loving, so that ions and polar substances, which are also hydrophilic, can pass through easily. Then the exterior part of the protein is hydrophobic. Hydrophobic, water-repelling, so that if this is an integral protein, fibrous, the area here is hydrophobic, water-repelling, that interacts with the fatty acids that are also hydrophobic. So, hydrophilic interior, which is water-loving, allows ions, which are also water-loving and polar substances, to pass through easily. At the same time, the exterior, that is hydrophobic, interacts nicely with the interior hydrophobic area of the phospholipid, this area. Again, this is cholesterol. The cholesterol, the part of it which is fatty, anchors the membrane proteins in the layer. That's cholesterol. Let's not forget that interior proteins, channel proteins, carrier proteins, alpha-helix proteins, as we have shown them, they are permanently embedded. But then we also have globular proteins. These globular proteins, they are not fibrous like these three. They are water soluble, they are spherical, compactly folded. They also can have channels through to do transport of substances. But then, because they are water soluble, they can easily be dissolved based on the state of the cell, based on the pH, based on the ionic composition of the cell. As the cell changes, processes are going on, new proteins will have to be formed, etc., etc. These globular proteins are water soluble, and so being water soluble, they can easily be dissolved and can easily be made when needed. However, the other integral proteins are not water soluble, they are fibrous and permanent. Meanwhile, all these integral proteins, besides transporting substances in or out of the cells, they also act as receptors. They are adapted and sensitive to various hormones and conditions that cause them to pass information into or out of the cells. So they are adapted to do that as well. Now, beside the integral proteins that spans across the membrane, we have peripheral proteins. These peripheral proteins that are attached to the outer surfaces or inner surfaces of the membrane. So you have peripheral proteins. These are all peripheral proteins. And the peripheral proteins, you can have some globular proteins as peripheral proteins. You can also have alpha-helix protein. So this alpha-helix, you can have a small one sitting near here as a peripheral proteins. And other proteins are also peripheral. Now, as we said, the globular proteins and other proteins, once they are peripheral, they are not permanent. They are temporary, attached, because they can easily be dissolved by water and affected by pH. The adaptations here is that because they are water soluble and they are temporal, they are formed based on the needs or the metabolic processes that are going on in the cell that needs these kind of proteins. They will be formed and they can also dissolve. And that is their adaptation. Besides that, they have other adaptations, like because they are peripheral, in the cytoplasm part of the cell, cytoskeleton attached on them. These are cytoskeleton. They can attach onto some of the peripheral proteins and so make the membrane firm and make the cell firm. That's also an adaptation. Besides that, the peripheral proteins as well as the integral proteins also serve as receptors. They can get hormones attached onto them or cause various reactions to go on. They are signaling tools. Other conditions affect them, like light, various chemicals that causes them to release a chain of reactions in the cell or in the extracellular fluid that goes to affect other cells. So signaling. Some also serve as enzymes. Then other adaptations. You see that the membrane proteins can have chains of carbohydrates attached to them. That's the cell surface membrane. Can have chains of carbohydrates attached onto them, and they can form glycoproteins that are sensitive. They serve as markers of the cell. They also guard the cell to produce antibodies against foreign matter. This is what we have for today. If the lesson has been useful, give us your likes and do kindly subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. So until we meet in our next lesson, goodbye.